Resuming debate, the honourable member for St. John's East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'd like to thank the member from Caribou Prince George for his remarks. It's always great to rise in this House to talk about an issue that's so important to the people of Newfoundland and Labrador, and certainly the people from St. John's East. Amending the Fisheries Act to bring it into modern times and provide the flexibility we need to make sure that we not only provide for the care and protection of marine mammals like porpoises, whales, and dolphins, but also take into account Indigenous concerns and make sure that our Act and our fisheries protections takes their traditional knowledge and beliefs into account. It's also important that we provide some framework so that Canadians can better understand the decisions that the Minister will be making, how they will be made, to make sure that there's advisory panels to consult on fees, to make sure that people who are licensees under the Fisheries Act, who are engaged in the fishery, are appropriately paying into the system but not overpaying into the system, to make sure that when we administer the rights and responsibilities of government with respect to our offshore resources, that the stakeholders appropriately participate in that, and so the Advisory Council will be a great way to do that. We also have to make sure that we meet our international obligations for fish habitat, and I believe I'll be sharing my time with the member for... Oh, it's not necessary? Okay, sorry, we're on to make sure that we do the good work to protect the coastal waters of Canada under our international obligations under the ACCI targets of 10% by 2020. In order to protect these areas, we need to make changes to the Act so that we can protect fish habitat with respect to works, undertakings, or activities that may result in the death of fish or the harmful alteration, disruption, or destruction of fish habitat. In the case of Newfoundland and Labrador, this is obviously a very sensitive topic. Newfoundlanders and Labrador care about the protection and the growth of the biomass of fish off of our coasts, and at the same time we need to make sure that we can undertake our enterprise so that we can maintain the high standards of living that Newfoundlanders and Labradorians and indeed all Canadians get to enjoy. So this requires that we both maintain access to the productive areas of our coasts, but also at the same time that we identify areas that are ecologically important, and there's going to be a balance that needs to be struck. My understanding is that the Fisheries Ministry has, through the various mechanisms that already exist, hived off about 7.75% of Canada's waters for protection, meeting our targets of 5% by December 31st of 2017, but there's still some way to go. And the changes that we're proposing in the Fisheries Act, which the member from Prince Rupert will have a chance to examine in committee after hopefully we pass it here today, and I encourage all members to vote in favour of it at this stage, will allow the government to move forward and protect those next 2.25% or more of our coastal areas so that we can protect these ecologically important areas. Protect things like cold water coral off the coast of Newfoundland and Labrador, or dogfish off the southern coast of Newfoundland and Labrador. Make sure that our ecologically protected areas are interlinked so that species can travel safely through them, so that important breeding grounds are protected, important transitory areas for different marine mammals are protected. I noticed that yesterday the Minister made an important announcement about protecting right whales. This has been, quite a I mean, it's a scary prospect that it's possible that the world may lose yet another species this year in the right whale. We saw a couple of weeks ago the loss of the last male white rhino protected at Old Pejeta in Kenya, and now here we are in a situation where people are very concerned about the reproductive capacity of right whales in Atlantic waters as they pass through the Gulf of St. Lawrence, through very important areas for industrial development of Canada, but at the same time we need to take protections such as Minister Garneau is undertaking, the Minister of Transport is undertaking, thanks Mr. Speaker, under the Transportation Act, and also the Minister of Fisheries is doing. But the changes that we're proposing will allow them to do more and do it in the right way, provide them a period of time in which we can make quick decisions to save species. I look forward to the protections that are coming. I know when oil and gas proponents had been meeting with me earlier in this year regarding British Petroleum, for instance, and their desire to do offshore exploratory drilling off the coast of Nova Scotia. There was some concern that their ships, their drill rigs, whatnot, are going to be expected to move at a slower pace through those waters. I fully applaud the foresight of the Canadian Environmental Assessment Agency in including those conditions, because now we're seeing that this is going to be an important factor not only for oil and gas exploration but for other transportation in the Gulf of St. Lawrence, similar to what happened last year, is my understanding. So it'll be great to see. It is very heartwarming and good to see the government of the day putting in place the mechanisms, regulatory, policy-related, and now legislative, that will help Canada meet its international targets to protect cetaceans. The 45 days to address the threat of the proper management and control of fisheries and conservation and protect fishing is obviously very important to Newfoundlanders and Labradorians. There's a strongly held belief, not always supported by the science, that cod is coming back. We see it coming back in Norway. We see it coming back in the North Sea. We see Iceland's cod fishery recovering, and yet Canada's cod fishery remains a bit stagnant. But it's important to have hope. It's important to make sure that the science is done. I applaud the government's earlier decisions to hire more fishery scientists in Newfoundland and Labrador to help create a plan to see the regrowth of the cod stocks. But as we're seeing this year, the science does not support a regrowth. Cod still finds itself in the critical zone. In order for us to get back to the point where we can have a sustainable amount of biomass so that cod fishing can be undertaken safely with the preservation of the resource, that historical amounts of cod can be taken and support the critical mass of infrastructure that's needed to make sure that Newfoundland can fully engage in the fishery, requires that we be patient, but also that we do the necessary science. You know, it's good to see that the minister will be provided with special tools under the Act in order to take special steps to put a halt to overfishing if the science deems that that would be required. Protecting, preserving, and restoring our environment should be a key principle of the Fisheries Act. It'll make sure that Canadians trust the Act. Not all Canadians, when they think about fisheries, think about the same way Newfoundlanders do. I mean, I need to have empathy for the environmentalists who, when they look at the fishery, they see it as something that has perhaps a larger impact on our environment than I do. But it's important that all Canadians have confidence that our fisheries are being undertaken in a sustainable way. I know Newfoundlanders and Labradorians have faith that it is and that more could be done. They have faith that the government is doing the right things by putting scientists in place. They like that the focus is on the fishery, that the Minister of Fisheries is taking this time to propose new legislation to bring it into the 21st century, to make it more modern. We don't want to return to the previous version of the Fisheries Act, but to make the law even better than it was before. Through this process, it's not just something that's risen out of, the imagination of the minister. This is after a period of thousands of consultations undertaken by the minister and his department. All Newfoundlanders and Labradorians find this to be of critical importance to our future. When the previous minister was in Newfoundland and Labrador early in this government's tenure, all Newfoundland and Labrador MPs were invited to participate in the consultations that happened at that time, and those consultations have continued. People feel that their voices are being heard by the government, but not always, perhaps, by the department. And so providing this link between Canadians, the government ministries, and then back to the departments is important for confidence to be created. These changes will allow both environmentalists and people who are engaged in the industry of fishing to have more confidence. It will allow us to meet our international obligations with respect to the preservation of 10% of our territory, and it's long overdue. So without further ado, I'd just like to encourage all members of this House to support the bill at second reading, get it to committee where people can answer some of the questions that my colleague from Prince Rupert St. George had earlier, and that we can have this improved for future generations of Canadians and the preservation and growth of our resource. Thank you.